Hey everybody, welcome to Oregon State University's Permaculture Design Pro class. This is the Spring and Summer 2024 class, and we are on office hour 6. Nice to see everybody. As of right now, we don't have any questions lined up, so we can just take ideas or thoughts or conversations from folks as we need to. We've got some fun stuff boiling in the background that I thought I might share if there was interest. But first off, just a check-in. How's the class going for everybody? I'd like to get a check-in from everybody who's on the call. Where are you at? How are you feeling? What's going well? What's not? And I'll choose the first person, and then that person can choose the next. So, Amy, I'm putting you in the hot seat.
So I got held up with the last the water map one, mostly because math is an overwhelming thing for me. So I kept looking at it and I'd like take a bite-sized piece of it and then I'd walk away and then I'd come back to it. So I did finally get through that one, and I feel like overall it's really helpful. It's just a lot of those places where it's not necessarily permaculture design, but the how to make Google Slides do this or how to do this math piece are the ones that are kind of holding me up, if anything. But the course itself is wonderful.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so a little bit of math phobia, which I think all of us have a bit of coming out of different levels of schooling. And then, yeah, just the skill set, the digital skill set, like learning how to do the thing. Gotcha.
Mm.
Okay,
Yep.
awesome. Who are you choosing to go next?
Sean.
Thanks. Um, can you guys hear me? It was rough at first.
Yeah, we got
Yep.
you.
Okay. I'm just way behind right now. I still haven't turned in the previous assignment, the water assignment. And it's mostly because I just had a lot of things going on. I just got back from a family vacation, and a lot of what Amy said about the assignment. I actually found the topographic mapping pretty difficult for my site because I did the practice one okay, and then I kept just every time I would redo my own, I was getting something different, so it couldn't be correct because I just kept getting different results. I tried it a few times, and just kind of left it for vacation, and so I'm going to get back into it today and see if I can't finish that up and get the next one finished up too. But other than that, I'm really enjoying the class. It has stimulated a lot of other interests, things that are kind of tangentially related to this. And I'm really enjoying this just entire field of learning that I'm experiencing right here. So that's it.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean. Yeah,
Uh,
and if there's any way to help you, if there's an issue with the water mapping, just feel free to reach out.
I put a note in the question section and I left an extra slide. So I'm going to turn it in the way I've done it. And then maybe on the video, if you just want to give me a little how you would do it, I can probably learn from that. So,
Yeah, yeah, happy to, happy to.
cool. Jessica.
Thank you. Um, I I've really been enjoying it. I'm learning a lot from the videos. Um, I think my biggest thing is definitely the digital skills. I'm doing the tutorials over and over again as I'm working on the slides. Um, the water one was a doozy for sure. Um, but yeah, I'm just keep trying to truck through. I think my biggest questions come more from the business side. I think that's where I start feeling overwhelmed. I'm very comfortable in the world of plants and gardening and things. But like last night I was with my parents and they've just they had some landscapers just rip out all of their dead plants around the perimeter of their yard, and they just had a sycamore tree die. And so they've just they kind of have a bare landscape as far as that goes, just like lawn. And my mom was bemoaning, we need someone to design our yard, and so the idea, so I struck up conversation, and there's an awful lot of educating. You know, because my dad wants something that's low maintenance, right? That we're getting old, you know, and so trying to like breach that gap of, well, the lawn is a lot more maintenance than it could be, you know, like you could have something that's beautiful but not high maintenance. So I came home a little overwhelmed with the like gap in like, you know, the transition from lawn to be willing to do this, I guess is so it's one of those, I don't know that my parents are my ideal client. But that gave me a really good taste yesterday for, you know, I am very passionate about it. I'm very excited about it, but it's also a little overwhelming on this end of it, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, I hear that. So when you start out, the first thing that should be a milestone that you should be working towards is a portfolio piece. And usually when we talk about portfolio pieces, it's by hook, by crook, however you can get that first portfolio piece. And friends and family are usually, you know, the first potential targets. So the fact that they potentially have an opening and that kind of conversation came up, it's a great opportunity. Remember that it doesn't have to be everything. It could just be edge plantings. It could just be the plantings that were removed. It could be just taking a small corner of the lawn and turning it into pollinator habitat or turning it into a rain garden, you know, something that makes sense, not, you know, taking something from the permaculture shelf and then slapping it down the landscape. But, you know, working that edge in, especially with folks that are nervous, can help people get into it. So the property that I used in the templates is my dad's. And over the last 4 years since I made those, he's implemented probably 50% of the design, which is pretty remarkable because there was a design and he could take off the big hugelkultur bed below the fence and he could take the raspberry, you know, like all of these things are slowly coming about. So if you just start them off with, you know, some kind of pollinator habitat, and I say that because they're largely maintenance free, definitely less than a lawn. But heavily mulched perennial pollinator habitats are largely maintenance free. You might do a little bit of trimming here and there, but that's really only if you want to, if it's spaced appropriately. So that's kind of the lowest hanging fruit. And then if you move up from there, you could put them into fruit. You could put them into some production that comes off of the landscape. The other thing you could focus on is beautification. So thinking about what are the colors that are coming into the landscape throughout the season. So we've got our spring, our summer, our fall. And then there's winter color as well when we start to take a look at trees and bark color. They can give a spray of color as well, which is nice to have in the winter. Where are you located?
Utah.
Utah. Okay, yeah. So there's a lot of colorful reds and orange in the bark department, and of course your evergreens. So I think both of those would be there. And then the other aspect is how can you manage and use the water more intelligently on site? Utah's generally a pretty dry state. So
Yes.
how can you put that water into application and remove some of the watering that they do already?
Yeah. Yeah, that was definitely big on the list. I guess he just got one of the big tanks
Okay.
that like had oil in it. So yeah, because it's the town they're in, they water with culinary water. And so their lawn, like their water bill is massive.
There you go.
So
And
that's
that's a good
yeah.
point. If somebody has a pain point within their landscape or their project, and if you can just focus on solving the pain point. So if they have a huge water bill and water is expensive, increasing the organic matter of the soil, increasing the water holding capacity, decreasing the water load on that landscape, you can save them 10, 20, 30% within a 2 to 3 year period. And then over 5, you can get it down to 40 or more, depending on what the speciation you choose. So if you move towards a xeriscaping pollinator landscape in that kind of environment, that's brilliant. You know, it helps them out tremendously. And then if you use smaller scale earthworks or just directional flows, hugelkultur, things of those natures, that's remarkably helpful. Plus, you get a project in the ground before and after photos, which is what we need when we start off.
I actually, I did have a question pop up in this conversation. My dad's an attorney and he usually works with rural areas, and he brought up a client that he had that was upstream, and this kind of tied back to the last assignment. He was upstream, he was excited, he put ponds in, and then the guys down the hill said, you can't do that, that's our water. So I was just curious, like it was very, because he said, you know, people don't understand that sometimes the water on your property isn't yours. And I know that's more of a legal thing, but I felt like in terms of like this class, I was curious. I guess it just sparked some curiosity on that front, as far as like if you had a client that had that issue that was upstream, how would you like go about something like that?
So, sorry, my client's the ones upstream or downstream?
Yeah, so he was upstream and put in some ponds to
Yeah.
because he had the stream running through his property,
Yeah.
and the guys down the hill, so downstream of him, came up and told him he had to remove the ponds.
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways to look at this question. The first is there's human law and there's natural law. Natural law bats first and last, which is kind of what permaculture is about. It's about understanding that we're part of ecology, and if we don't work with ecology, it's going to stop working with us. So there's a bigger conversation here that everything we hold in rainwater harvesting is a drop in the bucket. That is to say, it's a very small amount. And once you get through the rainwater harvesting or the water harvesting assignment, you'll realize that it's a huge number, and you can only ever hold such a small amount. That water is imperceptibly is an imperceptible difference to the water that flows through a property. And you just do the math. It's like take the water flow that comes through that property by calculating the watershed, taking the average annual rainfall, take the coefficient, and then compare it to the volume of water that pond holds. I bet you it's less than 2%, maybe 1%. So from a natural law perspective, they're just not aware that it doesn't change the water that flows through their property at all. The difference with humans is that what we see is what we understand. We're very, very myopic. And we also have something called landscape amnesia, where we don't really track how landscapes change because we don't live outside anymore. We don't live as tribal individuals who are outside and interacting with the landscape. So with these two things combined, we have a deficit in literacy. We really can't see the landscape for what it is. And so our work in both design also comes almost mandatorily that we also have to educate, and we have to share these conversations. And if we share them in a way that has a scientific background, generally it doesn't provide too much ire because it's just what it is. Like this is where I was just at one of the things I was going to talk about if we had time. I was just at a site visit, and the clients bought a property that as of 2006 was part of the river. And over time, the water bottling company who was near them made a berm and created land out of what was originally river. And so now they're in this situation where the river is wanting to reclaim their land. They've already bought it, it's there. And the bottling company has a vested interest to keep the berm intact because that then keeps their observation wells and all these other things that are important. But it was one of those hard things that we were just talking about. Sometimes you have to give them the hard facts. It's like, okay, I'm not necessarily here to make your dreams come true. I'm here to see if what you want is feasible, and if so, how best to make that happen. So in that situation, if you've got somebody upstream that's got a couple of ponds and somebody downstream, there's that natural law conversation, and then there's going to be regulation. So state by state, province by province, country by country, region by region has specific laws. And your dad's right. In some states and provinces, the rain that falls on the land is not owned by the people, which then brings up the conversation of civil courage. So sometimes in situations, it makes most amount of sense just to do what needs to be done to keep the water, to allow the people to be sovereign in their state of being. But as a designer, as we go back to that adage, the burden of design falls on the designer. You have to give your clients that full scope. So starting to understand Utah's water regulations would be really useful for you. Understanding whatever their Water Sustainability Act or whatever analog they have there will be important. Understanding how much and what you can take, understanding what's called live load and dead load, which is the water that's held above grade and below grade. Those would all be really important things to understand, actually for everybody to understand about your state or province, or country. And in some places, it's the Wild West. So in Africa, you can do whatever you want, generally speaking, in most countries, and definitely in the countryside. So in that case, if the law is not supporting the person who's lower in the watershed's claim, then it's a conversation piece. And maybe it's about bridging the gap by saying, you should build some ponds too. Like, you should take some of this water, you should work with it. Generally, named creeks cannot be siphoned off of to fill ponds. That's generally the rule within North America. So if you have a named creek, you usually can't take water from it. And most of the conservation organizations, and especially the fish and wildlife organizations, regardless of the volume of flow that comes from a stream, they almost always classify it as fish habitat, because they have such a mandate to protect everything that it's kind of an overreach. It's kind of like the fire alarm or your smoke detector going off when you're cooking. You know, it's a little bit of an overreach in terms of what's going on. But because of that, it can be very difficult to get ponds that are filled by creek or stream or whatever named flow. So that would be the second thing I would think about. And then the third is just the community aspect. You know, what's the value of having water on site for potential fire protection? What's the potential of having wetlands on site for drought? This is where, when we go back to beavers and their analogs, beavers really kept the majority of North America outside of drought during drought years, because they had all these repositories of water in the watershed. And due to that, when there were times of drought, those areas became little enclaves of ecology and kept water in the area. So, you know, if you can start to become educated within that watershed conversation, that can be a wonderful thing to share with clients as well.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, great question.
Jean-Daniel, you want to go?
Yes, of course. Well, it's going well. Let's see. The timing of the break was nice, because the soil is proving challenging. I kind of have misleading results that doesn't fit well between the tests. So I'll look deeper into that. Namely, the percolation test seems to drain very fast, and when I look at the texture and the jar test, it seems more like rain on the clay side, but it drains pretty fast. So maybe I did something with the percolation test that wasn't correct. I noticed that there seems to be rocks in the soil, even though it's kind of clay substance. So my guess is that there's something happening there between the gravel and the clay percentage. So I don't know if you have any knowledge about that, but I took advantage, yes, of this time to to go ahead a little bit on next lessons and watch some interesting videos as well on that you did on business and fire, you know, on YouTube. On very interesting stuff. So no, I'm enjoying, but harvest season is coming, so let's pray that all my harvest won't be like the ASCAPs, because it's ASCAP season right now at the first fruits, and it's kind of a nice surprise, but already challenging. So I'll have to to look at my schedule and make things fit. But yeah, very nice stuff. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, John Daniels. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see in your soil assignment what you come up with. The ribbon test is kind of definitive. So if you can push out a ribbon, and depending on its size, it really can dictate what it is. If that ribbon does indeed break, it's probably a silt or dispersive clay that's acting more like clay. But really focus on that ribbon test. That'll give you a good sense.
When I did it, actually, there was some rocks in it, and I did remove the rocks, you know, to perform the test, because there seems to be those small rocks, like half a centimeter or so, in this sample. And when I remove it, then it feels like it's still gritty, but it holds, and there's a ribbon, and it doesn't break. So yeah, kind of a
yeah. So it might just be a large aggregated clay soil that, and it might be dispersive clay. Did the clay settle rather quickly when you did your shake jar test, or is it still very cloudy?
Well, I have to look, because well, I've left it for a week now, and it's kind of due to. But I don't know yet exactly. But I see in the jar there's some rocks in the bottom. Seems to be quite an interesting layer at the top, but I don't know definitively yet.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to your assignment and just taking a look at what the pre-existing survey has to say. If it's, you know, it sounds like moraine or till, which generally has a lot of infiltration capacity. And if that's the case, then it's probably with a clay content or it's dispersive clay, which is, you know, pros and negatives. You know, you're never going to have flooding in a site like that, but at the same time, you're going to have a fair bit of water holding capacity because of the clay to a point, whereas the majority of it will filter through. It's kind of a joke in all of these situations, because if you're working from an organic perspective, and I mean that in terms of ecological perspective, not, you know, certified, you're coming from an ecological perspective, your solution to almost everything is add organic matter to soil. And you can add organic matter through root systems, you can add organic matter through tilling, you can add organic matter through adding aerated compost extracts and teas. You can add organic matter by grazing the material or browsing the material on top, which then creates root sloughage that then creates more carbon in the soil. So generally our conversation, regardless of soil, is always about adding organic matter. And one of the things that we don't do enough of, but definitely students that come through my section of this course do, is really adding a lot of vegetative decompacting elements, or just adding more organic matter. So this is sowing things like parsnip, daikon radish, turnip. Basically, you're adding tuber seeds and you're allowing them to decompose in ground, and it just creates these little repositories of organic matter in the soil that then attract microorganisms, earthworms, and of course, once the earthworms come in, they're the big mixers of the soil, bioturbation, where they come in and they mix everything together and they create that nice fluffy loam that we all love so much. So yeah, I would think about what kind of soil creation strategies as you get to that soil assignment might be valuable, and I would think those would be some of the ones I would suggest.
Well, my garden is producing quite nicely. I've added some compost in like 5 years, every year a little bit more compost, and also some green cover crops and like you spoke about daikon. I use that as well, but I'm kind of more intrigued about any future pond with that kind of soil, so that probably my guess is that I would have to dig even deeper than like the 30 centimeters, like bring a small heavy machinery or something like that to dig 1 or 2 meters to make sure to see what's going on there. Because to me, well, I don't have much experience on that, but it's kind of hard to say as of now, at least.
Yeah, that's very porous. That's very porous. So you know, in this situation, if you identify a couple of sections or potential points of water retention on the landscape where a pond might be of interest. I would then bring in an excavator to do a test slice. And this is where you have the excavator go down to the full arm length of the excavator. And basically every bucket full, you pull out some material from that and you do a soil test. So you basically get a sense of what the material is as you're going down. And what you're looking for is you're trying to find a layer of clay that's 30, 40%. 40 is ideal. And that usually becomes the layer that you tie into. So if you think about, if you're choosing correctly, if you're thinking it's kind of in a valley, if you then build up the dam from that layer, then that material ends up becoming not impermeable, because all ponds leak, but it definitely has a very low leakage rate. So if you do find the spots that you're looking for, bring in an excavator, take a test slice, take samples all the way along, document the whole aspect so that way you know it. Half a meter, meter, meter and a half, two, all the way down to wherever the end of that arm is. And then at that point, you can make your decision. Generally, when you're in an area like that and you can't find clay, you're not going to be doing a pond there, because the opposite side of that, or the option is you either bring in material, so you bring in clay, and usually we're trying to get clay on as a diaphragmatic lined pond. So the difference between the first one is that we're tying into a clay layer inside the earth, and this one would be we're digging a depression and lining it with clay. The problem with that is that, one, it can be expensive because we have to find the material and truck it in. Two, if we're not doing it at a time when it's raining, it'll crack, and most clay that we're bringing in is gray or red, and they're non-sealing clays, so they don't seal after they've cracked. So it kind of becomes a long-term issue. And then the third is, which I don't think many people are interested in, but sometimes it's the right solution, is doing an artificial liner. So doing something like an EPDM liner or ferro cement or something to that effect. So those are kind of your options. Besides that, there's kind of far-flung stories and myths about glaying ponds, GLEYING, glaying ponds. And this is where we put animals mostly, so ducks, geese, or pigs inside the depression we've excavated, and then we feed them in an area, and their feeding and their defecation, their urination, and their hoof or foot action basically creates these gley soils. These are the soils that, if you're ever walking on the side of a marsh or a pond and you're walking in rubber boots and your boot gets stuck and your foot comes out, but your boot stays where it was when you took your step. Those are those very mucilaginous soils that really keep a sealing or sealant on the pond itself. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see your assignment and see what it has to say.
Well,
about.
I've seen that on some spot, the kind of place where when it rains, you put your feet and you can't get it out. It kind of,
yeah.
So my bet at this, it might be it might be a good spot, but yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, awesome. Sounds good. Thank you. Juan, you came in a little late. We're just checking with everybody. How's the course going? Good, bad, otherwise? What's been your experience?
Well, it's very rich for me, and every assignment that we are going through, it's showing how big the spectrum is. So when you start talking about permaculture, you say, okay, yeah, organic, holistic, grazing, but then you start saying, okay, soils is like one world, water is another world, where you can be all your life learning and getting into. So it has been very eye-opening what you have said before and through the course, that we have to choose some compost or some other parts that you are not, or that you will ever be doing, no, because it's not of your interest. But so far, I think soils and water have been my favorite topics, especially soils, because yeah, there's so much different geology through the country, through the even in between your state or your county.
Mhm.
And don't say anything about the world, because you have sands in. It's amazing, amazing.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Yeah, there's a sort of shiny thinginitis that affects most people after a PDC, and anything permaculture related, regenerative related, just grabs your attention and you want to do it all. And what I've learned is if you can be specific post PDC, like, oh, that's where I want to go, that's what I want to learn, you go a lot faster because you can't learn it all at the same time. It's the beauty of sequencing. If you place things in the sequence order of the priority of your passion, so the things that you love to do, it can catapult you, propel you forward. It can create more and more enthusiasm. If you try to learn the things you ought to learn because you think you ought to learn them, it can really destroy that motivation and just leave you in a place of like, oh, well, I'm doing this because I ought to. But yeah, follow the passion of soils. I could see you becoming a great resource in your country about that. That's great. All right, Amy, I do have a water catchment question. Yeah, let's have it.
Sorry, switching back and forth. So basically I've worked in schools. I was a teacher school counselor for years, and now while I have this passion that I want to follow, had keep seeing and having ideas about working on like school property type things. And a lot of the I guess the rain or the water part of it definitely opened it up for me, because we just purchased this property, but it had a new asphalt shingle roof on it. So we're like, we have to wait, I guess, through before really using, I guess, that it's like 2 years, right? Something like that to
Yeah, so there's a couple ways to go at it. One, you can wait for it to off gas, which there hasn't been recent studies, but the one that I saw years ago was like 5 years to off gas. The other option is you can go through treatment. So you can work in treatment, and it all depends on what you're using it for. So if you're just using it for irrigation, you can basically use it with just something like a first flush diverter and then a common J tube that comes into a tank.
Okay. Okay. So further than that, that kind of made me, while I was thinking about the schools and how a lot of them here have a good chunk of their property is now like a solar farm type thing. And I would imagine the same kind of contaminants or similar kinds of things are coming off of solar panels, but I wondered if there's a way to, I don't know, filter it through marshes, like created marshlands, or is there still some way to use that water afterwards? I'm just kind of like letting ideas kind of out there, but I wondered if that's even a possibility.
Yeah, so generally photovoltaic cells are either glass or composited on top,
Mhm.
and generally they don't have a lot of contaminants that come off of them. So
Like so there's not like heavy metals or anything like that in it.
no, because
That's
everything's
I tried to
under.
do a little research, and it basically was like don't use solar panels for water catchment, but I mean I
Yeah,
feel like
like I've done it and I've run the test and it's not an issue.
okay.
Because the cells themselves are encased in glass. So sure, the heavy metals within some of the photovoltaics, sure. In the batteries, sure, but water hitting glass and then coming off, it's a very
Ah,
substance. There's not a lot there.
okay, good. Because it just seems like an untapped
Oh,
place to me.
it's just a surface to collect water off of.
Okay. All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Great question. Thanks. Awesome. All right. Any questions that have popped up since we began? Or else I'll move us forward to a recap of the soil assignment.
Can I ask a real
If
quick
I
question?
will. Oh,
Yeah.
go ahead, John. Go.
You mentioned that excavator test with the pond and finding the clay layer. When you find it, were you saying that you could use that clay to kind of line the areas that weren't clay? Like using that as a pond liner? Is that what you were saying?
So a little different. So generally when we're looking for a place to place a pond, we're trying to find a place in the landscape where the shape of the land allows us to move the least amount of earth to capture the most amount of volume. So generally little valleys where we go from convex to concave have two major values to them. One is when you go from convex to concave, usually the shape of that change has a tightening of the landscape. So we end up being able to put in a little dam and collect a lot of water. The other thing about that is the violence of the raindrop conversation, where when a raindrop falls down on a soil molecule called a ped of soil, it breaks apart the sand, silt, and clay. Now the sand, silt, and clay are in solution, and it's flowing over top of the landscape. And when it goes from convex to concave, it's going fast, and then it stops, slows, and there's a moment where the inertia of what's in solution stops, and so it starts to settle out in sand, silt, and clay, similar to what we do in the shape chart test. What's interesting about that is those points, those key points that P.A. Yeomans talked about and discovered, are where we tend to take a look to see if there's clay, because you have to think about landscapes in terms of geological epochs. So for thousands, tens, hundred thousands of years, that water has been moving over in solution and has been settling out. So those are those points in the landscape where you're always looking for. And they're usually the points in the landscape that have a little bit of dew in the morning, or they're a little bit wetter than the rest of the portions of the landscape. They may have a spring in them. There may be a good place for a pond. So if we decide that that's the place we're going to work on, then what we would do is we'd come with our excavator and dig down. So, in a valley, if we take a single slice through it, we're going through all the layers, the strata there. And hopefully what we're finding is we're finding a layer of clay. Now we have to think, if we find a layer of clay in just a test slice, that layer is in through that whole valley form. So that means at that level, that's, impermeable, semi-impermeable. And so if all we did in that valley form is put up a dam, we would cut off that valley form, kind of, an inverted fingernail, if you will. Now, if we find that layer of clay is a foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, whatever, chances are we can go further down below that, take that clay out and use that to create the dam wall, which then seals in that pond. If we have no clay on site whatsoever, so now different scenario, we've looked, we can't find it, we have good spots, a good placement, then we may move along to say, okay, let's do some due diligence here. Let's compare options in terms of time and money. And if we did have to bring in clay, if we did bring in a liner, if we just tried something like the glaying process, how would we then do that? But basically, if you dig down in an excavation slice and you find a clay layer, you got what you need. You don't have to take that and put that someplace else, unless it's a good idea to. You might find another spot that's more advantageous. But again, you have to measure out and calculate what's the time to get down to it, to excavate it, to apply it in the other site, etc. Normally what we're doing when we're developing ponds in this manner versus the dugout, which I can explain if folks are interested, is we're trying to find those spots in the landscape that want to hold water naturally and just work with the landscape as it is.
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I'm thinking of it for my own place. I think most of my property was excavated for the home site. So you're talking about like epochs of time with these deposits. I don't think I'm going to be able to find, something that natural. At least I suspect. So.
Yeah, we can always pull up your, depending on the topography and if that data is good.
Yeah.
Anybody else dislike the changes to Canvas as much as I do?
What happened?
Oh, they changed the linking and the threaded discussions. They changed it over the break. Okay, so Right, and then you've got the creek, and the creek flows from up to down, right? So I'm just gonna bring this up.
Yeah, the problem is where I want to put it is kind of that left corner.
Up here?
Yeah,
Yeah. So there's a couple of things here. You know, you already have a creek that's flowing through. I probably wouldn't put a large, like if you wanted to put something like a natural swimming pool or something above the house, sure.
yeah.
I probably wouldn't put a big pond above the house only because there will be seepage and foundation issues and all the rest of that. So I probably wouldn't put it right there. But yeah, you know, it'd be interesting because this also has a little valley form as well. Be interesting because you've got a valley form here. Be interesting to see if there is any depositional materials. And it'll also be really interesting to see your soil assignment. That'll give us the full picture.
Okay.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I would be cautious about putting a pond above a house that has what, 5 meter contours? Oh, wait a second. How does this work? Is this 445?
10 feet.
That's 55. So is this for this contour or is this for this contour?
Wow, because when I was thinking of it, I was
So,
thinking of not the line, but the space in between. So I'd have to go back and check that actually.
yeah, I'm probably good to fix that. So just to put it directly beside the line,
Oh, okay.
that'll be useful going forward. But yeah, so, and I don't know where the next line might be on that landscape, but yeah, if that's, you know, 5 to 10 feet of gain and a pond above you, that would, yeah, I would be conscientious about that.
Mm,
Yeah, a house is an expensive asset. It's a dry asset. So generally assets that are dry, we should keep dry. It's one of the reasons why I don't infiltrate water near a house more than or less than 3 meters or 10 feet.
mm.
Same thing with downspouts. It's like, as a designer, one of the most useful things you can do, especially in the urban environments, is go around and showing people how to put downspout extensions so that way the water goes away from the house.
When you're talking about water infiltration, though, something like a liner or a concrete,
yeah,
that
different story.
that's the okay. All right.
Different story. So yeah, if you go with a ferrous cement or if you go with an EPDM liner, yeah, different story. The main thing would be is that the overflow for that pond and the fill for that pond would be questionable. So when we're calculating that, we're basically taking a look at the area above it and its ability to be filled. So I'll just bring this back up again.
Yeah, my map is the topographical map is very confusing, but it seems like when I just look there, it seems like there's a bit of a valley coming into it. It's just hard to read for me.
Yeah, fair enough. So let's play the game here. So let's say, just because I'm liking this curvature, let's say this becomes the area where we put our pond. Now, this would not be an economical use of material. So we do something like this as a dam wall. And then we would probably extend a swale all the way across this contour, might even culvert under the road. And the reason for that is we want to have all this area above it for our capture. So all of this then becomes capture for this pond. And you can run the calculations on this now that you've done the water assignment. It's actually quite easy to take a look at what the volume of this would be and then what the total water above is. And you go above, obviously, you know, you'd be going above. This would be kind of up here, water assignment, and then this would be coming up like this. So that would be the watershed there. Let's do it in another color. It's a little bit too much. So this would be the watershed for this. And that's a useful calculation to do because you want to see if it's filled. Conversely, if you ended up putting a pond up here and you were trying to fill it, so let's say it's up here somewhere, the ability to fill this as a pond, you might be able to put a little swale here and a little swale here. I think you have like federal land to the north and west of you, is that right?
Yeah, it's like a public-private partnership that manages water for New York City.
Okay. Yeah, so you'd probably get in trouble if you decide to extend that onto land that is
Yeah.
north.
I couldn't extend it. We have rock walls, because Connecticut. But water flows through them, and there's a little bit of an indentation in that corner in the landscape where I think that water flows. And, we also have a good well too. I can partially fill it.
Yep. Yeah, generally what we're trying to do with ponds in this situation is trying to fill them from surface and
Yeah.
above flow. So there might be an opportunity, depending on placement, to work with the flow that comes off the house. That has a possibility as well.
Mhm.
Cool.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. That was fun. Cool. Any other questions?
Yeah, actually, yes, I was following the water assignment. I found out that there's a big potential on my side for water harvesting from the roofs. And being in the northern climate, I was wondering about how to manage, let's say, a tank or something like that during the winter. Obviously, to put it in the ground would be quite expensive, and not putting it in the ground, then you have to empty it every winter, and then you don't have any water when the spring come. So any strategy? Because I don't think I've heard a lot on like more tropic climates and stuff like that in the course, but for northern climate, is there an avenue or practical way to do it, or how is it done usually?
Yeah, so in northern climates, when we're working with rain tanks, we have two situations. One is above ground and one is below ground. Below ground, generally what you're working with is the same frost depth that you would be doing with water lines. So in places that I lived, rain tanks would have to be 6 feet buried, and then there's an electrical cost to then bring that water up and use it in landscape. So when you take a look at any of the LEED certified buildings in Alberta, all of the rainwater tanks are sunk in the ground, insulated, and then backfilled. And so they've got that amount of water to be held. Above ground becomes problematic for insulation because you're basically building a whole nother building. So instead of just a tank, you then have to insulate the whole tank itself, and then generally check on it throughout winter and through extreme weather events and cold snaps. The other option, as you're talking about, and you accurately addressed, is you have to drain it out, and then you may not have it for the time you need it, especially in climates where you're getting the majority of the rain in the fall. So that's kind of the full cost benefit analysis of seeing if a rain tank in that situation is a good idea, or if it's better just to give it directly into the ground and increase the water holding capacity of the ground itself. For each situation, it's going to be different, but if in-ground insulated isn't an option and above ground insulated as a building isn't an option, and then draining it out doesn't allow you to actually use it in the landscape, you've basically ruled out that rainwater harvesting in that way is appropriate for the landscape. In that case, probably what I would do is I would create more passive rainwater harvesting strategies, so that way the water can directly flow into the landscape, and then increase the amount of planting and organic matter, so that way the water holding capacity increases. There's no miracle solution on that one.
Yeah, that's what my guess. Maybe some marginal application for like the animals during the summer in the pasture. You kind of try to divert the flow there, and maybe a small tank near the greenhouse or something like that. But you won't go big, I think.
No, it'll be too much. And that's kind of when and where you do that full seasonal analysis. You're taking a look at all of those water levels and going, okay, where are we in a drought and where are we not? And where can we apply rainwater harvesting and where does it make sense? And in the temperate climes, when you have that cold snap that potentially can turn that asset into a liability, we tend to stay away from it. Good question. Anything else? As I was telling Sean before we started, I got a wicked cold on Friday, so I'm not horizontal for the first time in 3 days. So if I'm slow, that's. All right, folks, it doesn't seem like there's any questions, so we're gonna pop to our conversation on soil. So this is what we've got coming up next week. Folks are starting to think about this or working on it. So the soil assignment is really about trying to get a sense of what is this essential element on our site doing from the different tests that we can take upon it, the research that's already been there, and generally from what we know thus far in the course, how might we improve upon this asset? This is a great first start in going into this. You can go much deeper. You can go much wider with soil tests and analysis. But this is a good first step. So one of the first things we do is take a look at any pre-existing soil conversations. So these are previous soil assays of your area or country, and just get a sense of what it might be on your site. And then, of course, we prove everything. This is the great thing about the work we do. It's always about ground truthing. It's always about going to ground and actually seeing if what is out there is true. So in the soil test assignment, we're going to choose 3 spots in the landscape. We like to overshadow this or overlay this with the microclimate because it gives us a good sense of what's going on here. And then we pick 3 of our samples. We talk about the details of the microclimate, details of vegetation, sort of photo where you took that soil sample, and most importantly, the reason tested. So is this going to be a spot where you're going to be trying to produce more food? Is this a spot where you're thinking of doing a pond? Is this a spot where you might be thinking about excavating for some kind of rain garden? So all of this then gets collated and put into this first slide of the assignment. And as usual, if there's too much information, feel free to make another slide. Then we go into the soil test itself. So the soil test has a number of elements here. We've got the microclimate at top, which we'll be taking from this slide, just taking this and putting it here. Reason tested, so that's a simple copy paste. The same thing as the photo here. Any observations specifically? And then we've got these 2 lovely little dots, jar test and ribbon field test. And basically when we create our shake jar test, our soil will become leveled into sand, silt, and clay. After you put a couple of drops of soap in there and shook it real hard and then placed it down, it'll layer out. And then you put a ruler on there and you get a percentage. And then basically you're just using this triangle to put where the percentage of each of these elements would be. And so one is for the jar test, which is the red dot, and then the orange is for the ribbon test field. So that then gives us a sense of where those 2 are. Then we have a couple of images here. So we have the soil texture field. So nice to get a sense of what the soil looks like. We have the test pit and then the percolation test. And this is a great time to take a look at these examples here, or going back up to the top, looking at the portfolio. So again, you've got this great portfolio. This is another little pet project of mine that I created. Let's just have to, there we go. So this has, I think, close to 160 examples now. So you can take a look at any of these that are close in terms of city. You just click on the filter there. And let's say that you're in Utah. So state or province. So we are in Utah. We've got 3 previous examples. So that'd probably be a good thing for everybody to do as they're going into and looking at their soil assignment. Is that 82? I think it was. Yeah, excellent. Excuse me. And then it's a rinse and repeat for the other 2. So 3 soil tests. Then talking a little about the limiting factors of your soil type. So what are some of the downsides? Is it too free draining, retains too much water? Is it hard packed, hard pan, mostly clay? Just talking a little bit. And then how do your soil samples compare to the narrative description? So of what you found up here in terms of those soil tests, how does what you found actually compare? In a lot of the urban environments, we have what's called, we've created a soil classification in the urban environments called soil mosaic. And that means it's a hodgepodge. It's a whole bunch of things put in there because there's been development and excavation and filling and all the rest of it. So chances are if you're in the urban environment, you'll have a lot to say here. Otherwise, it might be very similar, or if the information is not available for your site, your country, etc., you may find that there's a lot to converse about here because your data is actually better than the broad scale data for the country. Then we start talking about composting. We start talking about resources. So talking about what are some nitrogen rich materials that you could find either on site or available. And then what are some other carbon examples? And then what other resources could be used for building soil? So what kind of materials, where could we find such things? All of those good aspects. Then we go into the goal. So this is a great place to start thinking about the phasing and how to go through thinking about what you want to do and when you want to do it. So there's some excellent examples here. There's also an excellent example recently that I just put in here. So I'm going to delete that. And then you can also say which of the examples you want. So you can go to soil. These are kind of like great. Click Y for yes, done. This would have been, I think it was AFA. I did a great job on the soils. So that would have been around 80, 82. Again, I think her soil plan blew me away. I've yet to put it back into the template though. Yeah, so this is a great example of just going into all the goals and then all the actions she's going to take, the timeline, materials needed, really excellent. Really gets a sense of why she was going to do all the things she was going to do. Then she went to, and we don't ask for this, she did this, how will the soil building plan respond to the limiting factors? So that was great as well. So that's AFA Kendall Wall. Definitely a great one to take a look at there. Oh yeah. So we did have it down here, but more as a narrative reply, but I really like how she put it into it. And then taking a look at your soil tests, take a look at the strengths, the weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, as usual, and then any assignment conclusions to go at the end. Any questions about that?
Just, I guess my question is the physical removing of the soil for the test.
Yeah.
Am I using like a trowel, a garden shovel?
Yeah.
What's my
shovels.
best like shot?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, shovels work really well. There's good instructions within the course about how to go around doing the percolation tests. And so shovel's great because it'll give you the diameter of the hole that they're asking for in pretty short order.
Okay. And do I need to go down, like, I'm not taking just necessarily the top couple inches. I should go down a little bit. Is that?
Yeah,
like,
so basically it says
through?
to go down about a foot to 2.5 feet. Because basically when we're taking a look at soil, we have what's called the O horizon or the organic layer. And we're trying to get past that to the parent material to really assess what that parent material is looking like. So we're trying to get down a bit deeper, and that also gives us the ability to take a bit of a cross section of what the soil profile looks like. And a lot of this is giving you a sense of what you can do at larger scale without having to employ or deploy larger materials and larger scale conversations. So know that we're trying to teach some basic skills while still keeping you within what you can do within a 2-week period and the course scale and scope and all the rest of it. I'm sure you guys know this by now, but each one of these sections is a lifetime of work. So if you want to become a rainwater harvester and go deep like my buddy Gord Baird, that's a life. And truthfully, if anybody wants to get gainfully employed within 6 to 7 months post PDC, go into rainwater harvesting. We are at the brink. We are at the tipping point. We've gone past the brink. We're past the tipping point. We're moving to the next 25, 20 years is going to go humid and wet. And then we're going to drop off precipitously to hot and dry. And we're already doing that, but the precipitable values are still largely the same year after year. They're getting smaller and smaller, but we're getting these big events that are coming at the same time. So you have any desire to become a skilled tradesperson and, you know, put in tanks and piping and help people analyze those aspects, it's a great way to jump in really quickly. Cool, cool. Any other questions? All right. Sounds good, folks. What are we taking away from the conversation today? What was of value with what we chatted about?
I think it's great. I'm sorry. I think it's great to hear about the projects of all of you guys, because although we are a short group, it's very good to hear about all the questions that we have been following through these meetings, especially today. I think that today was a very Q&A productive time.
Awesome. Thanks, Juan. Anybody else want to chime in?
I was happy for a little bit of pond discussion. For some reason, water, ponds, that's just what I'm kind of gravitating toward. I think they're super cool. And I was excited to talk about them a little bit. So that's what I took away. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, mate. Anybody else? Okay, awesome, folks. Well, we'll see you in 2 weeks' time again. If you have any questions or comments and want to reach out before then, feel free to reach out at javin@allpointsdesign.ca or on Canvas. And yeah, if you're struggling, definitely reach out. We don't have to struggle long. Like if you give it a shot and you're like, that's confusing, just reach out. We can solve it pretty easily. So know that you're supported throughout the course. And I'll see you in 2 weeks. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.